Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Happy Monday evening, guys. It is 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, or a little bit before that. I'm going a little bit early. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm going to go over with you tonight an interesting article that came out. I'm going to show you this article. And with this article, people had asked me about this, and I'm going to go over with you the actual research of what was published and how this, when you strip down the research and you become a little bit better than just a headline reader, you can become a savvy health person, a savvy consumer, and you can point out a lot of the bunk that takes place, especially when it comes to doing things that actually make a little bit of sense for you. So if you are watching right now, make sure that you say hello on YouTube and on Facebook, also on Rumble. Just make sure you say hello. Let me know where you're watching from as well. But the title of today is this: Can skipping a meal kill you? Can skipping a meal kill you? And if you saw what came out from the American Heart Association, then yes, you would actually probably believe that skipping a meal can actually kill you. But let's break this down a little bit. Okay. Now, coming up a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, April 23rd, is our approach to inflammation. This is very, very important because I'm going to talk about heart disease and inflammation, cardiovascular disease at the end. This is absolutely fascinating. But our next in-person event, so if you are from the Chicagoland area and you want to work with us directly, please make sure that you register for our next inflammation event. That's going to be Tuesday, April 23rd at 6 o'clock p.m. This is very, very important. And in fact, if you are watching on Instagram, you can go to the top of our page. You can click on our link tree and you can see where you can register for that event. You'll see the actual link to register for the inflammation event on our Eventbrite page. If you're watching on Facebook, you'll be able to see that as well. But we have a new link tree page. And so those links should all be up and running and work. So register for that if you are from the Chicagoland area, please. And it's going to be Tuesday, April 23rd at 6 o'clock p.m. Please don't register for it if you are not from the Chicagoland area. Sometimes we have people from Europe who register for it. This is an in-person only event. And we're going to talk about why inflammation can lead to problems like weight loss resistance, cancer, problems with your hormones leading to infertility, thyroid issues, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, autoimmunity, and yes, even hormone imbalance. We don't try to balance hormones because the body is way smarter than any doctor, especially. Now, that's our in-person event. And if you want to work with us remotely, and if you are from the contiguous 48 states, residing within the contiguous 48 states, then you can go to our link tree and you can actually see that we have a webinar. That webinar, you can register for it. You can watch it right now, or you can schedule to watch it like on a Tuesday or on a Saturday morning at a certain time. Make sure you have an hour of your time to be able to watch that. This is for people within the contiguous 48 states who want to work with us remotely. If you watch that, you'll see at the end a link that you can follow along, and you can schedule a remote call, a discovery call with me. Okay. So, and this is the same exact talk that we're going to be doing in person. And if you watch it, there's a really cool story at the end, a personal story at the end, especially of why I absolutely love what I do, why I love what I do, especially. And so I will tell you this, though, that this is your last call. This is your last call. If you've been sitting on the fence, this is your sign, okay? Because at the end of the week, I'm going to be taking this down. And I'm also, for the time being, I'm not saying that this is going to be forever, not working with people remotely via phone call or anything like that. So this is your last call. And if you snooze, you will lose. So I know a lot of people are just like, oh, where's my sign? Here's your sign. So make sure that you get registered for that inflammation talk, because it's going to be taken down. Actually, my staff asked me to do that because I think I'm overworking them a little bit. But it's going to be taken down at the end of the week. So for the time being, you won't be able to find it. So here's your last call. And make sure, guys, that you get registered for that inflammation talk, because when you get registered for that inflammation talk, you see the link to be able to work with me directly, especially. Okay. All right. Can skipping a meal kill you? So I had a lot of people who asked me this and they were absolutely frantic. And my first response, my first like thought that I got is it doesn't make sense. And the reason why it doesn't make sense is because cardiologists belabor the point. It's all about LDL. And I'm like, if it's all about LDL, why would skipping a meal raise your LDL and cause your arteries to just start to clog up with atherosclerosis? But this is the actual article that came out of the American Heart Association. Okay. And it came out March 18th, 2024. So March 18th, 2024. So this was not even a month ago. And this was the headline from the American Heart Association. They said this: 8-hour time restricted eating is linked to a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death. Okay. So 8-hour time restricted eating is linked to a 91% higher risk of cardiovascular death. So just in the headline alone, you look at this and you would say, I should eat all the time or else I'm going to have some kind of heart attack. So just the headlines alone, how it's framed, makes you kind of do one of these. I'm kind of wondering a little bit. Okay. So I went to the Mayo Clinic and I said, what did they actually say about intermittent fasting, otherwise really known as time restricted eating? And here's what the Mayo Clinic actually says. And I love bringing up the Mayo Clinic because where I'm from, if someone can't figure it out, then they just defiantly go into the Mayo Clinic and they're going to figure it out. I'm like, they're great. They're great diagnosticians. They absolutely are. But at the end of the day, what's their solution? It's always going to be in the form of a drug, some kind of new novel drug. Drug treatment is still what they're always going to do. The reason why is because it's still medicine. It's still fire department care. So the Mayo Clinic talked about time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. Here's what they say, because there's different types of this. Number one, you might do alternate day fasting. And here's what they say it is. You want to eat a normal, healthy diet. Interesting, huh? It doesn't give you license to eat whatever you want, and then completely fast. So you have a normal diet one day, and then you completely fast or have a small meal the next day. Usually, if you do have a small meal that is fewer than 500 calories, you can actually eat a lot of food, just 500 calories as well. So you have alternate day fasting. So one day you eat normal, the next day you don't eat, or you eat 500 calories or less. The next one is called 5-2 fasting. You eat a normal diet 5 days a week and you fast 2 days per week. Now, the whole idea behind this is that you may pick 2 days during the week in which you are going to completely fast. So you may eat on Tuesday night, and then you may say, you know what, I'm not going to eat until Wednesday night. So I'm going to fast for 24 hours. And then I'm going to eat on Friday night, and I'm not going to eat again until Saturday night. And so that would be, and you do that every single week. And that would be a good example of 5-2 fasting. But then you also have, and this is what this article from American Heart Association was talking about daily time restricted fasting. So you may eat normally, but only within an 8-hour window each day. And there's like 16-8, there's 18-6, there's 24. And there's sometimes 12-12. And so basically there's different time periods in which sometimes you're eating and sometimes you're restricting your food. So you eat normally, but only within an 8-hour window each day. For example, you skip breakfast, but you eat lunch around 11 o'clock a.m. and then you finish eating with dinner at 7 o'clock p.m. So you're getting your food within an 8-hour window. That's what the Mayo Clinic actually talks about. So now we don't necessarily we talk more. It's not really fasting. We talk more. We would rather prefer to say that it's time restricted eating. But here are some of the things or the different types of time restricted eating. So you have 16-8. And in fact, the reason why I have it circled is because this was the one that they looked at within this study. They were looking specifically at people who fasted for 16 hours, or they restricted their food for 16 hours, and then they ate within an 8-hour time window. Then you have some people who go a little bit further, which they're fasting for 18 hours and then eating within a 6-hour window. Then you have some people who actually develop, the iron will, and I've done this before, in which they fast for 20 hours, and then they eat within a 4-hour window. And many times within a 4-hour window, you really only have time to eat one meal, which is why next to it, I have OMAD, which really means 1 meal a day. 1 meal a day is also known as OMAD. So if you are eating in a 4-hour window, you probably are only eating 1 meal, or really can only stomach enough food for just 1 meal each day, which is why, again, they call it 1 meal a day, or OMAD. Okay. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about time restricted eating. Okay. Time restricted eating is not magical. And I have done videos on this. You can go back and look for them. Same thing with 3-day fasting, 5-day fasting. It's not really magical. I know people say, "Oh, I feel so much better." I'm like, you know why you feel so much better? Why you have so much bloating and why you lost 20 pounds? You didn't eat at all and you lost so much inflammation, so much swelling, because you probably have digestive issues. That's the reason why you feel so much better. Excuse me. And I talked about that on, when people, and I have fasted for 3 days, I have fasted for 5 days. The longest I think I've gone is 6 days of just water and lots of minerals, potassium, magnesium, things like that. But time restricted eating, or restricting your food to certain number of hours that you can eat per day, is really nothing magical. And here's the reason why. Here's the reason why people can get some decent results from doing this. Number one, you're going to end up eating less, especially if you just mindlessly eat and snack all during the day. Number two, you tend to stop mindlessly grazing. And in fact, I've talked about leptin being the hunger hormone, and people will mindlessly graze, especially if they have leptin resistance that's affecting brain function and things like that. Time restricted eating doesn't necessarily mean that you are eating healthier, okay? Because it's not actually an actual diet. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're eating better food. And number four, it's not really fasting, it's time restricted eating, because true fasting requires 24 hours of withholding from food, depending on your transit time. I'm going to talk about this in just a second. Depending on your transit time, you still can be extracting nutrients from food 20 hours in as well. Now, here's the thing you got to pay attention to specifically when you talk about time restricted eating. If you only have a certain amount of time that you can get your nutrients, get your food in, you have to be a lot more on point with your nutrition, because you're going to be eating less meals. So it's going to leave you a lot less wiggle room for junk food. Okay. You just don't have enough wiggle room for junk food. This is why you need to start looking at your food as getting your nutrients in, getting your protein in, and things like that, and not just mindlessly eating a bunch of junk food just because fits within your window. Okay. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't change that at all. You have a lot less wiggle room, which means you're going to have to be on point if you are eating less meals. Okay. Now, true fasting, if you're talking about true fasting, is over 24 hours, has a lot to do with your transit time. And yes, I have talked about, women and their cycles, how they should not be fasting over 24 hours, or if you are, should be based on where you're at within your menstrual cycle. Menopausal women you can fast whenever you want. Men, you can fast whenever you want. That's one of the things, one of the benefits of being a man. Yes, men and women are different. But the other thing too is as far as your cortisol is concerned, you have to have enough cortisol, because there are people who are very sick and they try to fast and their cortisol levels are so low that they can't mobilize sugar, and they're in bed the whole time that they're trying to fast. But this has to do with your transit time, because if you really think about it, your transit time, the average transit time, meaning I put food in my mouth, the time that it takes to go through the digestive system before it's eliminated in the south end of your digestive system, on average is usually about 24 hours. And here's the pro tip. If you want to know what your transit time is, what food do you think you should eat if you truly want to know how quickly it's going from mouth all the way down and excreting it in your bowel movements? Is eat corn. Okay? Because corn on the cob, for example, once it passes through and then you eliminate it, it's really just corn off the cob. Okay. And you'll notice, man, I don't really digest that as well. And that's why I don't believe that corn is very nutritious at all. So if you really want to know what your transit time is, have some corn on the cob tonight. And then, when you have a bowel movement tomorrow, see if that corn ends up in your stool. Okay. All right. So here's this study that the American Heart Association, who I believe has lost almost all credibility by putting this out. Here are some major problems with the study that probably nobody told you about. Okay. This is the actual study. Now, what this reminds me of is you have to look at the numbers and you have to look at the data. Don't look at the headlines. This is the same thing with the study. If you guys remember, and I'd done a video on this, on the cholesterol lowering drug known as bempedoic acid. So this study actually came out, and all of these doctors were saying, oh, bempedoic acid is just the latest and greatest cholesterol lowering drug. And then I looked at the data, and then I realized, wow, from the secondary prevention group, meaning I've already had a heart attack. Actually, heart attacks went up after being on bempedoic acid for a period of so many years, and there was an increase in heart attacks. This is what's interesting: is they removed those people from the study. They took those people out of the study, which was interesting. They just cherry picked it enough in order to show a favorable result. This is why you can tease out data in order to make anything look better. And in fact, in even the aspirin study that they did, they teased out the data enough to show that people of a certain astrological sign would not benefit from aspirin or could benefit more from aspirin. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy how you can fudge with numbers and statistics and things like that. So there's major problems with the study. I'm going to point these out here in just a second. So you really have to look at it and you have to study it. So what you see is you see the eating duration hours. And this is why, guys, if you were watching on the slides, it's going to be you'll be able to see all of this. And you guys can look this up as well. But this is the people who ate in under 8 hours. And then you have people who ate from 8 to 10 hours, 10 to 12. Then you have people who ate from 12 to 16 hours. And then you have people who ate greater than 16 hours. Now, if you were eating longer than 16 hours, you're basically eating all day. I don't know how you could actually do this. But the reference group that they're comparing everything to are the people who are getting their food in within 12 to 16 hours. Now, here's what's interesting. I've actually highlighted some problems in this actual study. If you look at the people who got their food in under 8 hours, one of the things you're going to notice is it's a lot smaller than all of the other groups. The reference group has almost 12,000 people in it. And the people who are intermittently fast or time restricted eating, there's only 400 people in there. And here's what's interesting is if you have a small sample size, it can skew the data, can skew the result. If you guys remember, you won't find this on YouTube, but you can find it on Rumble. You can find it probably on other social media platforms. Is I blood tested people after the the COV, et cetera, otherwise known as the Fauci ouchie. And I went over the blood work, and some of the people, they said this, it's only one person, so it's not an actual study. Well, they did the same thing here, and I actually agreed with them. And they did the same thing as the people that they were causing more cardiovascular incidents is the smallest sample size. Here's the other thing. From that group of people, they also had a disproportional amount of African Americans in that group. 23% were African American. The reference group, there's only 6%. The reason why I say this is that African Americans historically, factually, have a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. That's not a statement of race. That is a statement of fact. Is that they have a much higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. And then you also look at the people who smoke the most were in the fasting group, and they also had the highest BMI. Now, I'm not a huge fan of BMI. However, sometimes people, when they're not lifting weights or working out, because if I took my BMI, I'm considered clinically obese. But I also have a high amount of muscle mass as well. But most people don't have a high amount of muscle mass. And I'm desperately plead with them, please put on some muscle mass. Please start working on it now versus later. But in this 8-hour fasting group, they also had the highest body mass index, had the highest BMI out of the reference group, out of every other group as well. But they also won't tell you those things. They don't tell you unless you actually look at the actual data. Okay. So here's some major problems that leaves me scratching my head a little bit. Okay. Whenever anyone comes out with a study, I always ask the question, well, does it even make physiological sense? Because if they say, hey, sometimes you eat, sometimes you don't, and now you're going to have a higher incidence of heart attack, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Because here's the question that I have. If LDL, low density lipoprotein, which is what cardiovascular surgeons, MDs, and everything would say, harp on that this is what is causing cardiovascular disease, how can restricting your food intake to certain times of the day cause a higher LDL, or how could it damage the arteries? How on earth could it actually do that? Maybe there's also a different mechanism, and it's not just that. Number two, here's another major problem with the study. It was a self-reported study. Which basically what they did is they looked at this and they had people say, "Hey, can you remember how much you were doing time restricted eating?" And so they had to report on it based on memory. Okay, this is why these memory studies are absolutely garbage. And I've done a video on this as well. That they use the same mechanism. Say, "Hey, over the last year, how much red meat did you consume?" And they came out with a study that said the more red meat you consume, the higher amounts of type 2 diabetes. And there were some doctors that were on there that reported on it as if it was fact. And I absolutely obliterated and tore it apart. And you had to pay for that study. I'm like, I will pay for it. It cost me like $100 so that I could look at the actual data, and just absolutely tore apart. So it was a self-reported study, which leaves for a lot of uncertainty. The other thing is too, is that these people that identified in the 8-hour feeding window, they also did not do this every day. So they didn't do this every day, which makes me wonder, was this really a lifestyle that was going on? Now, here's the question that I have with, hey, can you remember how often you were doing time restricted eating or whatever? Now here's my question. Do you remember what you ate for breakfast on Monday, January 8th? That is an actual date, Monday, January 8th, 2024. Can you tell me exactly what you ate? Not only what you ate, but if you actually, how quickly you got all of your food in within that window. Can you actually remember that? Chances are you probably don't, unless you're doing some weird food logs or things like that. So major problems. Here's another major problem with the study is that, like I pointed out, is that in the 8-hour feeding window group, there were more blacks, 23% to just 6.6% in the 8-hour group than in the 12 to 16-hour group. Okay. So this is why this also doesn't make sense. Because again, if you guys can look this up, but African Americans have historically a lot higher levels of cardiovascular disease than other groups, specifically people who are Caucasian as well. Here's another major problem with the study is that more smokers, 27% to about 17%, were in the 8-hour group than in the 12 to 16-hour group. So it also included more people who smoked. And we know that smoking is not something that's good for you. Your doctor probably yells at you for doing that. No, smoking is not good. The inhalation of chemicals, irritating the arteries, causing all kinds of damage and toxicity and things like that. But there were more smokers in the 8-hour feeding group than in the people who were feeding for 12 to 16 hours. And then finally, another one is that they had also a higher BMI, body mass index, in the 8-hour group than in the 12 to 16-hour group. So they were probably carrying more body fat percentage. The reason why I tend to look at this and be like, yeah, that's probably true, is because most people aren't doing heavy weightlifting. Most people aren't carrying a lot of muscle mass that could cause their body mass index to actually go up. So the biggest major problems with the study have to do with race, has to do with smoking, has to do with BMI. And also the group that they said had higher incidence of cardiovascular disease was also the smallest sample size, which are all things that can confound the data. Okay. So, and by the way, you guys can look this up as well, because go ahead and look it up and look at the actual numbers. Okay. Look at the actual numbers, because the R group, this is the reference group, what they're referring to. And then what they reported on are the people who are getting their food in 8 hours less, or who at least reported on getting the food in 8 hours or less. Okay. So what's my verdict? My verdict is this: it's broken science. It's broken science. Don't listen to this, because it's absolutely baloney. Here's what's interesting. Did you know, and you can find this, guys, on PubMed. This is common knowledge now. Do you know that more than 10,000 research papers were retracted in 2023? 10,000 research papers were retracted in 2023, and that was a brand new record. So we set a record, yes. And you know what the record was? We set a record in broken science. Kind of makes you wonder, especially. Now, in the comments below, what I want you to do is go ahead and leave me a comment on, do you know where most of these papers were actually retracted? Do you know what the topic was? And I'll type it right now. All right, there you go. Because I probably can't say it. So 10,000 papers were retracted in just 2023, which was a brand new record. Now, some of you may say this, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, okay? You're just a conspiracy theorist. And here's the thing, is that a lot of the things that I have reported on, and people said were conspiracy, actually turned out to be pretty true, didn't it? So how's it working for you? So, so when people say, "Oh, it's just conspiracy," in fact, the people who say that it's conspiracy, I actually see them suffer the most, just because they refuse to listen and they just follow along just blindly to everything else. I wonder if they've been following those 10,000 research papers that have been retracted just since last year. So conspiracy, interesting. Well, I'm going to show you something that's probably going to make you wonder a little bit, because when this came out from the American Heart Association, Morningstar News had something there that was very soon after that. And on their website, it actually said this. Here's the title of their article that they came out with. A new study cites the health risks of intermittent fasting. Could it lift Ozempic sales, which is a GLP-1 agonist that people take in order to lose weight? Okay. Now, here is kind of the rest of the story if you look at the actual article, because they interviewed a cardiologist, a New York cardiologist, Dr. Goldberg. And here's what she said. Okay. She said this: she can't ignore the study's findings, especially when discussing weight loss options with patients. And she said this: it would give me pause. She said, though adding that additional research is likely needed into the danger posed by time-restricted eating, if you can imagine that. But doctors say it's perhaps inevitable that a study like this will have some people looking more seriously at weight loss medications as a preferred option. As Dr. Goldberg noted, there's already an uptick in the use of the drugs as is, which are some weight loss medications, the one that Oprah promotes and things like that. Now, here's what's interesting. Goldman Sachs recently predicted the annual market for these drugs, these GLP-1 agonists, could grow to $100 billion by 2030. Oprah Winfrey has gone public with the fact that she's taken one of the drugs and even promoted the medications as an invaluable tool in a network televised special that aired earlier this week. Interesting, huh? So isn't that interesting? And what's the conspiracy? Well, I'll come out and just say it, that scare people into doing something that can help them, let them know that it's going to cause heart attacks, that it's a completely debunked study that people keep reporting on because most people are just headline readers. And in fact, from this article from Morningstar News, they're just the headline readers. And you know what else? This doctor doesn't know how to read data, and she's probably hurting her patients. Have I actually recommended intermittent fasting for some people? Absolutely. Now, would you say that I've killed them as a result? So she's someone on this, Dr. Goldberg. She hasn't actually read the data. She's a headline reader, and she should do much better, much, much better if she is a doctor and she's a leader, leading people into a better life, because she has the potential to be hurting people by what she's actually doing. Now, I'm going to make a very bold statement. Are you ready for it? Here's a bold statement. And this has to do with a lot of natural health practitioners, has to do with a lot of medical doctors. And it's this. And I believe it's 100% true. Most health professionals don't know more than their protocols. Most health professionals don't know more than their protocols. Okay. that they copied and pasted from somebody else. And they don't have the ability to be able to think outside the box. And that's why when you talk about time restricted eating, I'm like, it doesn't make physiological sense. Not at all. Not one bit. And that's why I looked at it skeptic, but I also looked at the data, actually read it versus being a headline reader and just absolutely just trashing everything else. And then, you know, trying to promote weight loss medications and things like that and being scared of anything because the data does not support this. Okay. Now, the reason why I know this is this, and I say most health professionals don't know more than their protocols. You're not a protocol. You are not a protocol. That's why we have a saying, say, we don't test or we don't guess, we test. We don't guess, we test. How you eat can be highly individualized. And I don't recommend time restricted eating for everybody, but there are certain people who are having a tough day. Yes, it can be a strategy that you can use that can absolutely help them. There's no doubt about it. But I remember, and this is true, but I remember a natural health practitioner, and I wrote a book about 6-7 years ago. He took my book and he stripped my name from it, put a new title on it, put a different cover on it, and all the rest of the book was verbatim. And then he opened up a weight loss clinic promoting that book that he said that he wrote, and he copied and pasted everything from me, and he took it down really quick when I threatened a lawsuit. But the thing is, guys, and I've talked to a lot of people, is this: if you want to be so disgruntled with our healthcare system, get sick. If you want to be disgruntled, a lot of people are like, oh, I love our healthcare system. I'm like, you haven't been sick yet, because once you get sick, you're going to realize that most of what your doctor is telling you have basically is just protocols and what they learn, what doesn't even make physiological sense. And they just copied and pasted it. They learned it. They regurgitated, took their boards, became a doctor, got their letters after their name. And then now they know everything about everything, and they never learn, they never grow, and they certainly never read the studies as well. Okay. Now, I know what a lot of people think, and you may be someone who said this in the past, but let's change your perspective on this. You say, oh, it's just genetic. You know, heart disease is just genetic. Cancer is just genetic. All these things are just genetic. Looking at genes once you're sick is like looking at the bumper of a car after a rear end collision. Because once you're sick, of course, you're going to see the genetic expression of it. But looking at when saying that everything is genetic is like looking at looking at genes once you're sick is like looking at the bumper of a car after a rear end collision. You are going to see some damage on your bumper. The reason why I say that is this. It actually comes from Helio News, and this comes from a cardiologist. And here's what he said. It sounds like this is not a study, but this is actually a cardiologist opinion, an MD's opinion. But it sounds like he's a little bit perturbed when it comes to the U.S. healthcare system. And the title of the article, this was actually put out about 2 months ago. And the title of it, and this comes from Robert Quigley, MD. And he said this: why the cardiovascular community needs to take a closer look at inflammation. Interesting. Why the cardiovascular community needs to take a closer look at inflammation. And in this article, you can find this if you look up on Helio News. Patients, and here's the reason why he said this: patients with rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disease that predominantly affects the joints have an increased mortality rate due to cardiovascular events. Most notably, women living with rheumatoid arthritis have up to a 3-fold increase for heart attack, even without the traditional cardiovascular risk factors. As such, targeting inflammation in this context of cardiovascular disease is of utmost importance for me and my patients. Here's the problem. How does he want to control inflammation? It doesn't, not by getting to the causes of it. How he wants to get to inflammation is through drugs. See, this is where, and I talk about this in the inflammation talk, this is where everybody agrees. Everyone who's in healthcare agrees inflammation is the spark that leads to nearly every single disease that's out there. But where do we take a different path? How we handle it. Most of what doctors are doing is trying to cut out the tongue of inflammation versus we're saying, hey, let's not cause it in the first place. Let's just not cause it. But what's interesting is a threefold increase in heart attack women with rheumatoid arthritis, even when they don't have problems with cholesterol or things like that, yet they have a threefold increase. Maybe there's a different factor that's involved with this. So here's my biggest question. Wait a second. I thought it was all about cholesterol. I thought it was all about cholesterol, all about genetics. You have no hope. There's nothing that you can do. Just get on our drugs for as long as possible. I'm going to give you a different perspective. Okay. Now, you guys ever heard of forward head posture, also known as granny posture, otherwise known as nursing home posture? Here's what's interesting is I can even give you research that shows that if you have the granny posture with the head going forward, or if you have the nursing home posture, that it can cause more atherosclerotic plaquing in your carotid arteries. And here's an article that comes from PubMed. This was published about 10 years ago and not retracted, by the way. The effect of head posture on the healthy human carotid bifurcation hemodynamics. So if you look at where a lot of your blood supply, which feeds the brain through the carotid arteries, you have two parts of it. You have the internal and the external carotid artery, and a bifurcation is where it splits to become the external and the internal carotid arteries. All right, here's what they say. It affects the vascular supply, and it affects how blood goes through those areas, especially if you have excessive forward head. Head and neck postures may cause morphology changes to the geometry of the carotid bifurcation that alter the low and oscillating wall shear stress regions previously reported as important in the development of atherosclerosis. So when your head goes forward, it changes how the blood flows through the internal, external carotid arteries, and it causes more stress on those things, and it actually damages parts of those arteries and can actually cause damage, injury, and more atherosclerotic plaquing. And here's at the very end of the article, this is what is so interesting. These findings suggest that head posture may be associated with the genesis and the development of atherosclerotic disease, as well as complications in stenotic and stented vessels. Okay. So even when they go in and put a stent in, they still leave the forward head posture, they can still have a lot of problems that's associated with it. Okay. Now, you may say this, Dr. Nate, I eat clean. I fast to reduce my inflammation. I take a medication in order to lose weight. Okay. Now, here's the thing is eating clean can have a million different connotations. What is clean to one person may not be clean to the other person. And in fact, if I sat outside Target and I asked people, how's your diet? Do you know that most people would say, oh, it's pretty good. It's not perfect. I'm not that type of idiot, but it's certainly not terrible because I'm not a sloth or I don't overeat. Everyone wants to be in the exquisite middle, which is the cream of the crap, the best of the worst of the best. I eat clean. And I'm like, the only way to know if you're eating clean is check and see if you're having an inflammatory reaction to food proteins, which has a lot to do with stress, digestion, stomach acid, things like that. If you have to fast a lot in order to reduce inflammation, chances are there's probably a big time problem with your digestive system. And if not eating makes you feel better, then I'm going to guarantee it there's a problem with your digestive system. And the other thing too is if you need to take a medication in order to lose weight, I'm not going to judge you like necessarily for doing that, but there's some other things, and chances are you probably haven't been led through truly what it means in order to be able to burn fat the way that you are supposed to as well. Okay. So biggest thing that I want to tell you is this, is that if you look at this article, you have been lied to. You have been lied to. If you believed it, then you have been lied to. And I think they want you to stop believing things that even make sense anymore. And it leads to confusion and leads you to just throw up your hands and to start running after and just believing the health professionals. And this right here, you look at this, and if you look at the data, yes, you have been lied to. They no longer want you to believe things that make sense, but skip breakfast and you'll probably have a heart attack. That's how they made it sound. Okay. Now, with everything, this is why we talk about this is the whole chiropractic principle is mental, chemical, physical. So during the inflammation talk, we talk about mental stress, we talk about chemical stress, we talk about physical stress, and how all that plays a role in brain health, in healthy neurology, chemically, how stress can affect the gastrointestinal system, stomach acid production, all kinds of things, and how mental stress will literally, for a woman, will absolutely destroy their hormones. It's not, this is how the body was created. Yes, it is supposed to have a certain number of stressors. Without stress, any kind of stress, you'd be dead. But when we're talking about bad stress, when it becomes overwhelming, the body can no longer adapt to it. And the body was designed to adapt and to be healthy. But if it can no longer do that anymore, then there's too many stressors that's going on. You need to identify where they're taking place and then know what you need to do in order to remove those. What's really interesting is they had a woman was having all kinds of menstrual problems. And this has happened a couple times just in the last week, massive menstrual cycle issues. And then all of a sudden they got better. They got more regular, less painful. And did we need to balance her hormones? No, the body knows how to do that, especially if are really good at how to address mental stress, chemical stress, and physical stress, and how it leads to inflammation taking place inside the body. And that's why coming up a week from Tuesday is our next inflammation talk, April 23rd. Hopefully you have your taxes done by then. 6:00 p.m. You can go to the very top of our page if you're on Facebook, or if you are on Instagram. You'll be able to see this even on YouTube. And you can register for this in-person event. This is how, guys, if you're from the Chicagoland area, please come to that. I guarantee, guys, it will be worth your time. But this in-person event is absolutely awesome. And our webinar that we have, this will be taken down by the end of the week. So this is your last call in regards to that. You'll also be able to find that on our link tree. And this is for people outside of the Chicagoland area, but still within the contiguous 48 states as well. So can skipping a meal kill you? The verdict that I would say is it's broken science. And it's bunk and it's baloney. All you have to do is actually look at the numbers. Numbers don't lie. Statistics don't lie. That's why it's important, guys, to track so many different things. This is why I even will track my workouts, because if I don't track my workouts, you know what I end up saying? I'm doing pretty good. But what doesn't get measured cannot get managed. And this is why we test. This is why we retest. A lot of things we use are numbers and things like that. But can skipping a meal kill you? The verdict is nope. It doesn't make sense. So stop believing the hype. That's my opinion. And I hope you came to that conclusion as well. So guys, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I hope you guys have an awesome. Make sure that you like and follow our page as well for more information, and give me a topic for next week. Next week, I may just be doing a question and answer. I know that a lot of you have come up with a lot of great questions. I'll do my best to be able to answer as much as I can, but maybe I'll do a question and answer next week. That way I don't have to come up with a whole brand new topic. So guys, thank you very much again for watching. Be well, be blessed. And as always, I always say, remember who you are. Be well. We'll talk soon.